Sarah Martinez stared at the termination letter in her hands, the words blurring through tears she refused to let fall. After 12 years of dedicated service at Metropolitan General Hospital, her career had ended with a single signature on a piece of paper. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she sat in the empty break room, surrounded by the ghosts of countless shifts she had worked. The letter cited insubordination and failure to follow protocol as grounds for immediate dismissal. Sarah knew the real reason. She had refused to falsify medical records to cover up the hospital administrator's cost-cutting measures that had led to a patient's complications. When corporate profits mattered more than patient safety, speaking up became a fireable offense. Dr. Patricia Holbrook entered the break room, her face etched with concern. "Sarah, I heard what happened. This is completely wrong." Sarah looked up at the woman who had been both mentor and friend for over a decade. "They made their choice, Pat. Money talks louder than medical ethics. You saved that patient's life by refusing to cover up the medication error. The review board would have crucified us if you had falsified those records. Tell that to Administrator Williams." Apparently, avoiding a lawsuit was more important than doing the right thing. Sarah folded the letter and slipped it into her purse. "I should have seen this coming when they started pushing those new efficiency protocols." The efficiency protocols had been introduced 6 months earlier by the new hospital administration. Nurses were expected to handle more patients with less support staff. Medication checks were streamlined to save time, often cutting corners on safety procedures. Sarah had watched the quality of care decline week by week, but speaking up had only earned her reputation as a troublemaker. "What will you do now?" Dr. Holbrook asked, settling into the chair across from Sarah. "I honestly don't know. 12 years of experience doesn't mean much when you're labeled as difficult to work with. Williams made sure to include that in my file." Sarah's voice carried the weight of exhaustion and betrayal. Maybe it's time for a career change. The irony wasn't lost on her. Sarah had joined nursing because she wanted to help people, to make a difference in their most vulnerable moments. She had worked double shifts during the pandemic, held dying patients' hands when families couldn't visit, and celebrated recoveries that defied medical predictions. None of that seemed to matter now. Her phone buzzed with a text from her younger sister Elena. "Heard about the job. You can stay with us until you figure things out." Elena lived in a small coastal town 3 hours north, a place Sarah had visited only during holidays. The idea of leaving the city felt both terrifying and liberating. She had built her entire adult life around this hospital, these people, this routine. Starting over at 34 seemed impossible, but staying felt even worse. Dr. Holbrook reached across the table and squeezed Sarah's hand. "For what it's worth, you're one of the best nurses I've ever worked with. Any hospital would be lucky to have you. Except they won't know that. They'll only know what Williams puts in my reference check." Sarah's jaw tightened. "He made it clear that my future in nursing depends on keeping quiet about what really happened here." The what really happened was a 17-year-old car accident victim named Marcus Thompson. He had been brought in with multiple injuries, including a severe head trauma that required constant monitoring. The new efficiency protocols called for checking neurological signs every 2 hours instead of every 30 minutes. Sarah had refused to follow the extended timeline, knowing that changes in brain pressure could occur rapidly. When Marcus's condition deteriorated, Sarah's frequent monitoring caught the emergency early. Emergency surgery saved his life, but the incident triggered a review of the protocols. Administrator Williams had pressured Sarah to alter her documentation, making it appear she had followed the official 2-hour schedule. When she refused, citing both ethical and legal concerns, her termination became inevitable. Marcus Thompson's family called yesterday. Dr. Holbrook mentioned quietly. "They wanted to thank you specifically. They know what you did." Sarah managed a bitter smile. "That makes one family who knows the truth. Too bad it doesn't pay the bills or rebuild a career." She gathered her belongings from her locker, each item carrying memories of the life she was leaving behind. The stethoscope her parents had given her at graduation. The small potted plant Elena had brought to brighten her workspace. Photos of patients who had become like family over the years. Stuffing everything into a cardboard box felt like packing up her identity. The drive to Elena's house gave Sarah time to process what had happened. The highway stretched ahead, leading away from everything familiar toward an uncertain future. She had always prided herself on having a plan, on being prepared for any emergency. This felt different. This was starting over without a map. Elena's house sat on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, a modest two-story structure with weathered shingles and a wraparound porch. Sarah had always loved visiting here, but living here felt like admitting defeat. She pulled into the gravel driveway as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Elena emerged from the house before Sarah had turned off the engine. At 28, she possessed the same dark hair and determined spirit as her older sister, though her life had taken a different path. While Sarah had pursued medicine, Elena had chosen marine biology, eventually landing a research position with the local university's coastal studies program. "You look terrible," Elena said, wrapping Sarah in a fierce hug. "Thanks. That's exactly what I needed to hear." But Sarah found herself laughing for the first time in days. Elena had always possessed the ability to find humor in the darkest situations. "I mean terrible in a you've been through hell, but you're still standing way. Come on, I made your favorite pasta." The house smelled like garlic and herbs, immediately triggering memories of childhood dinners when their mother would cook elaborate meals to celebrate small victories. Sarah dropped her box by the door and followed Elena into the kitchen, which overlooked the ocean through large windows. "So," Elena said, stirring a pot of marinara sauce, "what's the plan?" "There is no plan. For the first time in my adult life, I have absolutely no idea what comes next." Sarah collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table. "I keep waiting to wake up and find out this was all a nightmare." "Maybe it's not a nightmare. Maybe it's an opportunity." Elena served generous portions of pasta onto 2 plates. "You've been at that hospital since you graduated. Maybe the universe is telling you it's time for something different." "Something different like what?" "I'm a nurse, Elena. It's not just what I do, it's who I am. And now I can't even do that because Williams has essentially blacklisted me from every decent hospital in the state." Elena sat down across from her sister, studying Sarah's face. "You know what your problem is? You think being fired makes you a failure. But you were fired for doing the right thing. That makes you exactly the kind of person the world needs more of. The world needs people who can pay rent and buy groceries. Moral victories don't come with paychecks. So we figure out a way to make it work. This town has a small clinic that serves the fishing community. They're always understaffed. It's not Metropolitan General, but it's honest work helping people who really need it." Sarah considered the suggestion. A small clinic would mean lower pay, fewer resources, and probably less challenging cases. It also meant getting back to the basics of nursing, focusing on patient care without the corporate politics and bureaucratic obstacles that had slowly poisoned her love for the profession. "Dr. Morrison, who runs the clinic, is good people," Elena continued. "He's more concerned with helping patients than pleasing administrators. Might be worth talking to him. What if Williams gives me a bad reference? What if word gets out about why I was really fired? Then, you tell the truth. Sometimes that's all you can do." After dinner, Sarah walked out onto the porch, listening to the rhythm of waves against the rocks below. The ocean air felt different here, cleaner somehow. The stress that had lived in her shoulders for months began to ease slightly. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe this was an opportunity rather than a catastrophe. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer. "Is this Sarah Martinez?" The voice was professional, official. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Commander James Mitchell with Naval Special Warfare. I'm calling about your nursing background and specifically your work with trauma cases." Sarah's heart skipped. Naval Special Warfare meant Navy SEALs. "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong person. I was just fired from my position. We know about Metropolitan General. We also know why you were fired. Ms. Martinez, we need to speak with you about a matter of national security. Can you meet us tomorrow morning?" The line went dead before Sarah could ask any questions. She stared at the phone, wondering if stress had finally caused her to hallucinate. Navy SEALs calling about national security seemed like something from a movie, not her real life. She went inside and told Elena about the strange call. Her sister listened with growing excitement. "This is incredible, Sarah. They must have heard about what happened with that patient. Maybe someone recommended you." "Recommended me for what?" "I'm not military. I don't have security clearance. This has to be some kind of mistake. Or maybe it's exactly what you need. Maybe the universe is opening a door you never knew existed." Sarah spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying the brief conversation. Commander Mitchell had sounded serious, professional. He had known about her termination, which meant whoever was behind this call had done their homework. The question was what they wanted from a fired civilian nurse. Morning came gray and foggy, typical for the coastal town in early spring. Sarah dressed carefully, choosing professional attire despite not knowing where she was supposed to meet these mysterious military personnel. Her phone rang at precisely 8 o'clock. "Ms. Martinez, this is Commander Mitchell. Are you available to meet this morning? Where did you have in mind?" "We're at the Harbor View Diner on Main Street. We'll be at the corner table in the back. Come alone. And, Ms. Martinez, this conversation stays between us." The Harbor View Diner was a local institution, the kind of place where fishermen gathered before dawn and gossip traveled faster than the morning news. Sarah arrived to find two men in civilian clothes waiting at the designated table. Despite their casual appearance, everything about them screamed military precision. Commander Mitchell was tall and lean with graying temples and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings. His companion was younger, broader, with the kind of alertness that suggested he could spring into action at any moment. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming. I'm Commander Mitchell, and this is Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez." Both men stood as she approached, a gesture of respect that surprised her. "I have to admit, this is the strangest job interview I've ever had," Sarah said, settling into the booth across from them. "This isn't exactly a job interview, ma'am. We need to brief you on a situation that requires your specific expertise." A waitress approached, but Mitchell waved her away politely. This wasn't a social meeting. "What kind of situation requires a fired nurse?" Sarah asked. "The kind where lives hang in the balance and conventional medical resources aren't available." Rodriguez spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a slight accent that suggested Hispanic heritage. "We've reviewed your file, Ms. Martinez. Your trauma experience, your decision-making under pressure, your willingness to put patient welfare above politics. That combination is exactly what we need." "Need for what?" Mitchell leaned forward. 6 days ago, a Navy SEAL team was deployed on a classified mission. The operation went sideways, and we have wounded personnel in a location where traditional medical evacuation isn't possible. We need someone with advanced trauma nursing skills who can work independently in hostile conditions. Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. "You want me to go into a combat zone?" "We want you to save American lives," Mitchell replied. "The same way you've been doing for 12 years, just in a different setting." The magnitude of what they were asking hit her like a physical blow. These weren't emergency department patients arriving by ambulance. These were warriors bleeding in some remote location, depending on her skills to keep them alive until evacuation became possible. "I'm not military. I don't have combat training. I've never worked outside a hospital environment." "We can address the training issues," Rodriguez said. "What we can't address is finding another nurse with your specific qualifications who's available immediately and has already demonstrated the courage to make hard decisions under pressure." The reference to her recent termination wasn't subtle. They had clearly done extensive research into her background and character. Someone had recommended her specifically, but who? "This is insane," Sarah said. "Yesterday, I was fired for refusing to falsify medical records. Today you want me to join some kind of secret mission. Yesterday you proved that patient care matters more to you than personal consequences," Mitchell corrected. "That's exactly the kind of person we need." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If she said yes, she would be walking away from everything familiar into a world she didn't understand. If she said no, wounded soldiers would suffer while military medics did their best with limited advanced training. How long would this assignment last? Unknown. Could be days, could be weeks. Depends on when we can extract our people safely. "And if I don't survive this mission?" Mitchell's expression grew grave. "That's a possibility we have to acknowledge. This isn't without significant risk." Sarah thought about Marcus Thompson, the 17-year-old whose life had been saved by her refusal to follow dangerous protocols. She thought about all the patients over the years who had depended on her skills and dedication. These wounded SEALs were someone's sons, husbands, fathers. They deserved the same level of care she had always provided. "I need time to think about this." "We understand. But time is a luxury our wounded personnel don't have. We need an answer by noon today." 3 hours to make a decision that would change everything. Sarah left the diner with her mind spinning, walking aimlessly through the small town while weighing an impossible choice. Elena found her sitting on a bench overlooking the harbor. So, what did they want? Sarah explained the situation, watching her sister's expression shift from excitement to concern to something approaching awe. They want you to be a combat nurse? Something like that. Elena, I don't know if I can do this. Hospital nursing is one thing, but a war zone? But think about what this means, Sarah. They specifically chose you. Out of all the nurses in the country, they came looking for you because of who you are and what you've proven you can do. What I've proven is that I can get fired for standing up for patients. What you've proven is that you're exactly the kind of person who should be taking care of wounded soldiers. These aren't corporate executives worried about liability. These are people who need the best medical care possible, and they've decided that's you. Sarah knew Elena was right, but knowing something intellectually and feeling ready to act on it were different things. The safe choice was to decline, find a position at the local clinic, and rebuild her life slowly and carefully. The brave choice was to trust that her skills and experience had prepared her for this challenge. Her phone rang again. Commander Mitchell's voice was calm, but urgent. Ms. Martinez, I know we said noon, but the situation has deteriorated. We need to move now. Are you in? Sarah looked out at the ocean, thinking about currents and tides, about how sometimes the only way forward was to dive into deep water and trust your training to keep you afloat. I'm in. Within 2 hours of accepting the mission, Sarah found herself at a military airfield she didn't know existed. The facility was unmarked, hidden behind what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse complex. Commander Mitchell led her through security checkpoints staffed by personnel who examined credentials with the intensity of people guarding state secrets. Everything you see here is classified, Mitchell explained as they walked across the tarmac toward a waiting aircraft. Nothing about this mission can be discussed with anyone, ever. Not family, not friends, not future employers. The lives of our personnel depend on operational security. The aircraft wasn't like anything Sarah had seen in civilian aviation. It was sleek, black, and radiated an aura of advanced technology. Chief Rodriguez appeared beside them carrying a large duffel bag. Your gear, he explained, handing it to Sarah. Medical supplies, personal protection equipment, and basic survival necessities. Everything has been selected specifically for this mission profile. Sarah hefted the bag, surprised by its weight. The reality of what she was about to undertake hit her with fresh force. 12 hours ago, she had been an unemployed nurse eating pasta with her sister. Now she was boarding a military aircraft headed toward a classified destination to treat wounded special operations personnel. Inside the aircraft, she was introduced to the rest of the team. Staff Sergeant Angela Torres served as the mission's communication specialist. Her equipment filled one section of the cabin with devices Sarah didn't recognize. Lieutenant David Park, an explosive ordnance disposal expert, sat quietly checking and rechecking his gear with methodical precision. First time, Torres asked, noticing Sarah's obvious nervousness. First time flying into a combat zone to provide medical support to Navy SEALs? Yes, this is definitely a first. Torres laughed, a sound that helped ease some of Sarah's tension. The mission briefing will help. Once you understand exactly what we're walking into, the nerves usually settle into focus. Commander Mitchell approached with a tablet containing classified mission documents. Time for the full picture, Ms. Martinez. What I'm about to show you cannot leave this aircraft. The briefing revealed details that made Sarah's stomach tighten. 6 Navy SEALs had been conducting reconnaissance on a terrorist facility in a remote mountainous region when their position was compromised. During the firefight that followed, 3 team members suffered serious injuries. Enemy forces now surrounded their position, making traditional helicopter evacuation impossible. The wounded include Petty Officer Jackson with a gunshot wound to the abdomen, Petty Officer Kim with shrapnel injuries to his left leg and possible internal bleeding, and Chief Thompson with a head injury from an explosive blast. They've been treating each other as best they can for 6 days, but their medical supplies are nearly exhausted. Sarah studied the medical reports transmitted from the field. The injuries were severe, but survivable with proper treatment. However, 6 days without advanced medical intervention meant complications were inevitable. Infection, blood loss, and secondary injuries from inadequate field treatment could prove fatal. How do we reach them if helicopters can't get in? We don't use helicopters for insertion, Lieutenant Park explained. We're going in on foot through terrain the enemy doesn't expect anyone to cross. It's dangerous, but it's our only option. The remainder of the flight was spent reviewing medical protocols for field treatment in combat conditions. Sarah learned about treating traumatic injuries without hospital resources, managing pain with limited pharmaceutical supplies, and maintaining sterile conditions in hostile environments. Every piece of information felt crucial, potentially the difference between life and death for the wounded SEALs. They landed at a forward operating base that existed primarily on classified maps. The facility was temporary, designed to support this specific mission before being dismantled and removed without trace. Sarah was assigned quarters in a small prefabricated building that served as both medical preparation area and living space. Dr. Elizabeth Crane met them at the medical facility. As a flight surgeon with extensive combat experience, she would provide advanced consultation while Sarah worked in the field. Her weathered face and confident manner suggested someone who had seen the worst combat medicine had to offer. "I've reviewed your background," Dr. Crane said, shaking Sarah's hand firmly. "Your trauma experience is impressive, but field medicine is different. Out there, you won't have laboratory results, imaging equipment, or specialist consultations. You'll have your hands, basic equipment, and 12 years of clinical judgment. Is that enough? For most situations, yes. For everything we might encounter, probably not. But you're the best option these men have, which means you're enough." The next 18 hours were spent in intensive preparation. Sarah practiced field surgical techniques, learned to use military medical equipment, and memorized treatment protocols for common combat injuries. She studied the specific cases she would be treating, developing treatment plans based on limited field reports. Equipment familiarization consumed much of the preparation time. Military medical gear was designed for durability and portability rather than the comprehensive capabilities of hospital equipment. Sarah learned to work with simplified diagnostic tools, limited pharmaceutical options, and improvised solutions for complex problems. The most important thing to remember, Dr. Crane emphasized, is that perfect is the enemy of good enough. In a hospital, you have the luxury of pursuing optimal treatment. In the field, your job is to keep them alive until they can reach definitive medical care. Physical conditioning was another concern. Sarah's nursing experience had kept her reasonably fit, but hiking through mountainous terrain while carrying medical equipment would test her endurance. A brief training session with Torres revealed muscles Sarah had forgotten she possessed. "The hike-in will take approximately 8 hours through difficult terrain," Torres explained. "We'll be carrying everything we need, and extraction will require hiking back out with potentially stretcher-bound patients. Are you prepared for that level of physical exertion?" Sarah thought about the double shift she had worked during the pandemic, the time she had been on her feet for 20 hours straight providing patient care. Physical exhaustion she could handle. The unknown psychological challenges of combat medicine worried her more. Night brought final preparations and equipment checks. Sarah organized her medical supplies with obsessive care, knowing that a missing piece of equipment could mean the difference between successful treatment and preventable death. Each bandage, medication, and instrument was positioned for easy access in stressful conditions. Commander Mitchell found her completing final preparations in the medical facility. Second thoughts. Constant second thoughts. But that doesn't change the fact that 3 men need help, and I'm apparently the best person available to provide it. You are the best person available. That's not a consolation prize, Ms. Martinez. That's why we came looking for you specifically. Can I ask who recommended me? Someone had to tell you about my background and recent termination. Mitchell's expression suggested he had been expecting this question. Dr. Patricia Holbrook contacted us through military medical channels. She served as a Navy flight surgeon before joining civilian practice. When she heard about our personnel requirements, she provided your name and a detailed recommendation. The revelation stunned Sarah. Dr. Holbrook had never mentioned military service during their years of working together. Apparently, her mentor had connections and influence Sarah had never suspected. She said you were the finest trauma nurse she had ever worked with, and that your recent termination proved your character rather than damaging it. That was enough for us to investigate further. Dawn arrived gray and cold, bringing departure time. Sarah had slept little, her mind running through medical procedures and worst-case scenarios. She dressed in military-style clothing that felt foreign but functional, checked her equipment one final time, and joined the team for final briefing. The insertion team consisted of Sarah, Commander Mitchell, Chief Rodriguez, Staff Sergeant Torres, Lieutenant Park, and 2 additional special operations personnel whose specialties weren't disclosed. Each member carried specific equipment and responsibilities for the mission's success. Once we begin the hike, communication with base ceases until we reach the wounded personnel, Mitchell explained. From that point forward, we're committed to the mission regardless of changing circumstances. Everyone understand. The team nodded in unison. Sarah felt the weight of commitment settling on her shoulders like a heavy cloak. There would be no changing her mind, no calling for help, no backing out when reality proved more difficult than preparation. The helicopter that transported them to the insertion point flew low and fast through mountain valleys that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. Sarah studied the terrain through small windows, trying to imagine hiking through such rugged landscape while carrying a wounded person. They landed in a clearing barely large enough for the aircraft. The helicopter departed immediately, leaving 8 people standing alone in wilderness that felt completely removed from civilization. The silence after the aircraft's departure was profound, broken only by wind through mountain peaks. From here, we hike, Rodriguez announced, shouldering his pack. Stay close, stay quiet, and trust your training. The trail wasn't really a trail, but rather a route Rodriguez navigated using GPS coordinates and terrain features. They climbed through rocky terrain that demanded constant attention to footing. Sarah's pack, loaded with medical supplies, felt heavier with each step. After 2 hours of hiking, they paused for water and rest. Sarah's legs already ached, and the altitude was affecting her breathing. 6 more hours of this seemed impossible, but the alternative was leaving wounded men without medical care. How are you holding up? Torres asked quietly. I'm holding up. Whether I'll still be holding up in 6 hours is another question. You will be. You'll be surprised what you can do when lives depend on it. The terrain grew more challenging as they climbed higher. Loose rocks made footing treacherous, and the thin air left everyone breathing heavily. Sarah focused on placing one foot in front of the other, trusting Rodriguez to navigate while she conserved energy for the medical challenges ahead. By midday, they had covered half the distance to their destination. The landscape was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Jagged peaks stretched toward cloudless sky, while valleys dropped away into shadows that seemed to hold mysteries Sarah preferred not to contemplate. Enemy patrols used the main approaches, Mitchell explained during a rest break. That's why we're taking the difficult route. Less chance of contact, but more physical demand. The second half of the hike tested Sarah's endurance in ways nursing had never prepared her for. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else, and the pack seemed to gain weight with each step. But thoughts of wounded SEALs waiting for help kept her moving forward. Late afternoon brought the sound of distant gunfire. The team immediately took cover behind large rocks, weapons ready. Sarah's heart hammered as she realized they were entering an active combat zone. Hospital emergencies had never included people shooting at her. Sporadic contact, Rodriguez reported after listening to the radio chatter. Our people are still in position, still alive. The final 2 hours of hiking were conducted with extreme caution. Every sound could indicate enemy presence. Every rock formation could conceal hostile forces. Sarah found herself moving differently, thinking differently, as survival instincts she didn't know she possessed began to emerge. As the sun began to set behind mountain peaks, Rodriguez signaled a halt. They had reached the area where the wounded SEALs waited. Commander Mitchell made radio contact using encrypted communication equipment. Eagle 6, this is Rescue 1. We are at your location. Prepare for medical support. The response came immediately. Rescue 1, Eagle 6. We have been waiting for you. Medical situation is critical. Sarah checked her equipment one final time. In a few minutes, She would be treating combat injuries under conditions she had never experienced. Everything she had learned in 12 years of nursing had led to this moment. "Ready?" Mitchell asked. Sarah shouldered her medical pack and followed the team toward their destination. 3 wounded warriors waited somewhere in the darkness ahead, trusting that help had finally arrived. "Ready." The wounded SEALs had taken shelter in a natural cave formation that provided protection from both enemy fire and mountain weather. As Sarah followed the team through a narrow entrance, she could smell blood, infection, and unwashed bodies that told the story of men surviving under impossible conditions for nearly a week. Emergency lighting revealed 3 figures lying on makeshift bedding created from equipment and clothing. Even in the dim light, Sarah could see that their conditions had deteriorated significantly since the initial field reports. What had been manageable injuries 6 days ago had become life-threatening medical emergencies. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson was conscious, but clearly suffering from severe concussion symptoms. His left pupil was dilated, indicating possible intracranial pressure that could prove fatal without immediate intervention. The irony of his name matching the patient whose case had cost Sarah her civilian job wasn't lost on her. Petty Officer David Jackson lay unconscious, his breathing shallow and labored. The abdominal gunshot wound had been treated with field dressings, but obvious signs of infection suggested internal complications. His skin felt hot to the touch, indicating fever that meant the infection was spreading. Petty Officer Michael Kim was alert, but weak from blood loss and pain. The shrapnel injuries to his left leg had been treated as well as possible under field conditions, but without proper surgical intervention, permanent disability seemed likely. More concerning was the possibility of internal bleeding that field treatment couldn't address. "How long has he been unconscious?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside Jackson while she assessed his condition. "About 6 hours," replied Petty Officer First Class Robert Hayes, the senior uninjured member of the team. "He was talking yesterday, but the fever got worse during the night." Sarah began her examination with systematic efficiency that came from years of emergency medicine experience. Jackson's pulse was rapid and weak, his blood pressure dangerously low. The abdominal wound showed clear signs of infection despite the team's efforts to maintain cleanliness under primitive conditions. "I need more light," she announced, pulling supplies from her medical pack. Lieutenant Park set up portable LED lighting that transformed the cave into a makeshift medical facility. The additional illumination revealed the full extent of what Sarah was facing. These men needed hospital-level intervention, and she had only field equipment and basic medications. Thompson's head injury presented the most immediate threat. Increased intracranial pressure could cause brain damage or death within hours. Standard treatment required surgical intervention to relieve pressure, but no surgical facilities existed within hundreds of miles. Sarah would have to manage his condition with medications and careful monitoring. "Chief Thompson, can you hear me?" she asked, shining a penlight into his eyes to check pupil response. "Yeah, I can hear you. Who are you?" His speech was slurred, confirming Sarah's assessment of brain injury severity. "I'm Sarah Martinez, a nurse. I'm here to take care of you and your team." "About time. Jackson's been getting worse. Kim's tough, but that leg is bad." Sarah appreciated Thompson's concern for his teammates despite his own serious condition. Leadership didn't disappear just because someone was wounded. She administered medication to reduce brain swelling and established monitoring protocols that would alert her to dangerous changes in his condition. Jackson's situation required immediate attention. The infection spreading from his abdominal wound could cause septic shock, which would be fatal without aggressive treatment. Sarah started an intravenous line and began antibiotic therapy, hoping 6 days wasn't too long to prevent systemic infection. "His temperature is 104 degrees, she reported to Commander Mitchell. "The infection is advanced. I'm going to have to open the wound and clean it surgically." "Can you do that here?" "I have to. If that infection reaches his bloodstream, he dies. It may already be too late." Working by portable lighting in a cave while enemy forces controlled the surrounding area wasn't how Sarah had imagined her first surgical procedure outside a hospital. She sterilized her instruments as thoroughly as possible and prepared to operate under conditions that would horrify any hospital administrator. "I need someone to assist," she told the team. This isn't going to be pleasant to watch. Chief Rodriguez volunteered, proving he had more medical training than his official designation suggested. Together, they reopened Jackson's wound, cleaned infected tissue, and irrigated the area with sterile solution. Jackson remained unconscious throughout the procedure, which was probably fortunate given their limited pain management options. "Will he make it?" Hayes asked when Sarah finally closed the wound with fresh dressings. "Ask me in 24 hours. If the antibiotics work and his fever breaks, he has a chance. If not," she left the sentence unfinished. Kim's leg injury was complex, but less immediately life-threatening. Shrapnel had damaged muscle tissue and possibly fractured bone, but the bleeding was controlled and infection hadn't set in. Sarah cleaned the wounds thoroughly, removed accessible metal fragments, and stabilized the leg with improvised splinting. "This is going to hurt," she warned before beginning treatment. "Everything hurts," Kim replied. "Do what you need to do." His stoicism impressed Sarah. She had treated civilians with minor injuries who complained more than this man with potentially crippling wounds. The difference between military and civilian patients was becoming clear. Working through the night, Sarah established treatment routines for all 3 patients. Thompson required neurological checks every 30 minutes to monitor for changes in brain pressure. Jackson needed constant monitoring for signs that the infection was overwhelming his system. Kim required pain management and wound care to prevent complications. "How long before we can evacuate them?" Sarah asked Commander Mitchell during a brief break. "Unknown. Enemy forces still control the extraction routes. We're hoping for an opportunity in the next day or 2, but nothing's guaranteed." The reality of their situation settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. She could stabilize these men temporarily, but definitive treatment required hospital facilities they might not reach for days. Everything depended on her ability to keep them alive with limited resources in hostile conditions. Dawn brought both hope and new challenges. Jackson's fever had decreased slightly, suggesting the antibiotics were beginning to work. Thompson remained stable but showed no improvement in his neurological symptoms. Kim reported that the pain in his leg was becoming more manageable. "You did good work," Hayes told Sarah as she completed morning assessments. "These guys were in bad shape yesterday. Today they're looking more like they might make it." The compliment meant more coming from a fellow warrior than praise from hospital administrators ever had. These men understood the difference between adequate medical care and life-saving intervention under impossible circumstances. Radio contact with the forward operating base brought mixed news. Additional enemy forces had moved into the area, making helicopter extraction even more dangerous. However, intelligence suggested that enemy patrols followed predictable patterns that might create brief windows for evacuation. "How brief?" Sarah asked. 30 minutes maximum, Mitchell replied. "Maybe less. We'll have one chance to get everyone to the extraction point before enemy reinforcements arrive." Moving 3 wounded men through mountainous terrain to reach a helicopter in 30 minutes seemed impossible. Jackson couldn't walk. Thompson's head injury made him unsteady on his feet. Kim could probably manage short distances with assistance, but carrying equipment while supporting wounded teammates would slow everyone down. "We need to prepare for evacuation now," Sarah announced. "If we get that 30-minute window, every second will count." She organized medical supplies for transport, keeping only essential items while ensuring nothing critical was left behind. Each wounded man would require specific support during evacuation, and she needed to be prepared for medical emergencies that could occur during movement. Thompson's condition began deteriorating around midday. His pupil responses became more unequal, and his speech grew increasingly confused. Sarah recognized the signs of increasing intracranial pressure that could lead to brain herniation and death within hours. "I need to reduce the pressure in his skull," she told Mitchell urgently. "There's a procedure I can try, but it's risky and I've never done it outside a hospital." "What kind of procedure?" "Burr hole drilling. I make a small hole in his skull to relieve pressure. If it works, it could save his life. If it goes wrong, I could kill him." Mitchell looked at Thompson, whose condition was obviously worsening. "What happens if you don't try it?" "He dies anyway, probably within a few hours." "Then you try it." Sarah had assisted with burr hole procedures during her hospital training but had never performed one independently. The technique required precise drilling through skull bone to reach the membrane covering the brain, relieving built-up pressure without causing additional damage. In a hospital, neurosurgeons performed such procedures with sophisticated equipment and multiple assistants. In this case, Sarah would be working alone with improvised tools. "I need everyone to understand," she announced to the team. "This could save Chief Thompson's life, or it could kill him immediately. There's no middle ground." Hayes spoke for the team. "Chief Thompson wouldn't want to die from a head injury when there's a chance to save him. Do what you think is best." Sarah prepared her equipment with meticulous care. The improvised surgical drill was designed for emergency field use, but had never been intended for neurosurgical procedures. She would have one chance to position and drill correctly, as any mistake would be irreversible. Working by LED lighting with Rodriguez providing assistance, Sarah began the most challenging medical procedure of her career. The drill bit had to penetrate skull bone without going too deep, reaching the exact depth necessary to relieve pressure without damaging brain tissue. The procedure took 45 minutes of precise, careful work. When Sarah finally completed the hole and saw dark blood draining from Thompson's skull, relieving the dangerous pressure, she felt a mixture of relief and terror at what she had just accomplished. "How do you feel, Chief?" she asked as Thompson's eyes began to focus more clearly. "Like someone just took a sledgehammer out of my head. Did you just drill a hole in my skull?" "I did. You're going to be fine." The successful procedure boosted everyone's morale and confirmed Sarah's growing reputation as someone who could handle any medical emergency. But Jackson's condition remained precarious, and Kim's leg injury still required surgical intervention they couldn't provide in the field. Late afternoon brought the radio message everyone had been waiting for. "Rescue 1. This is base. Extraction window opens in 1 hour. Duration 30 minutes maximum. Acknowledge." "Base, Rescue 1 acknowledges. Beginning evacuation preparations now." The next hour would determine whether 3 wounded SEALs lived or died. Sarah gathered her equipment, checked her patients one final time, and prepared for the most challenging evacuation of her nursing career. "Everyone ready?" Commander Mitchell asked. Sarah looked at her patients, thought about everything that had brought her to this moment, and shouldered her medical pack. "We're ready." The evacuation began under cover of approaching darkness, with every team member carrying specific responsibilities for moving 3 wounded men through hostile territory to reach a helicopter landing zone 2 miles away. Sarah stayed close to Jackson, who required continuous monitoring as they transported him on an improvised stretcher created from equipment and clothing. Commander Mitchell led the way through terrain that seemed impossible to navigate even under ideal conditions. Rocky slopes, narrow ravines, and loose gravel made each step treacherous. Adding wounded personnel to the challenge turned an already dangerous journey into a desperate race against time and enemy detection. Thompson walked with assistance from Hayes and Rodriguez, his head injury making balance difficult, but his determination keeping him moving forward. The burr hole procedure had relieved the immediate pressure, but any significant impact could cause bleeding that would prove fatal without immediate surgical intervention. Kim moved under his own power with support from Torres, his damaged leg making every step painful, but his SEAL training overriding physical limitations. Sarah marveled at the mental toughness required to continue functioning with injuries that would incapacitate most civilians. Movement to the east. Lieutenant Park reported quietly, scanning the surrounding area with night vision equipment. "Looks like a patrol, but they're not heading our direction." The team immediately took cover behind rock formations, lying motionless while enemy forces passed within a few hundred yards of their position. Sarah pressed her hand over Jackson's mouth, concerned that his labored breathing might give away their location. Every sound seemed amplified in the mountain silence. After 10 minutes that felt like hours, the patrol moved away and the evacuation resumed. They had covered less than half the distance to the landing zone, and the 30-minute extraction window was approaching rapidly. Simple mathematics suggested they wouldn't reach the helicopter in time. "We need to move faster," Mitchell announced. "Torres, take point. Rodriguez, help with Jackson's stretcher. Everyone else maintain security while we pick up the pace." The increased speed made the already difficult terrain even more dangerous. Sarah slipped twice on loose rocks, barely avoiding falls that could have injured her, and left the wounded SEALs without medical support. Her legs burned from exertion, and the thin mountain air left her gasping for breath. Jackson's condition deteriorated during the movement. His pulse became more irregular, and his breathing grew increasingly labored. Sarah checked his wound dressings during a brief rest stop and discovered fresh bleeding that suggested internal complications she couldn't address in the field. "How bad?" Mitchell asked, noticing her concerned expression. "He needs surgery within hours, not days. The infection may be causing internal bleeding, or the movement is reopening damaged blood vessels. Either way, he's not going to survive much longer without hospital care." The reality added urgency to an already desperate situation. Jackson would die if they didn't reach medical evacuation, but pushing harder through dangerous terrain increased the risk for everyone. Sarah found herself making calculations she had never imagined. How many lives was she willing to risk to save one? Radio communication from the landing zone provided updated timing. Rescue 1. Extraction birds are 15 minutes out. You need to be at the LZ in 20 minutes or the window closes. 20 minutes to cover terrain that should take 40 minutes under ideal conditions. Sarah looked at the wounded men she was responsible for treating and made a decision that surprised her with its clarity. Chief Thompson and Petty Officer Kim can make it to the landing zone in 20 minutes with help, she announced. Jackson can't, and trying to get him there that fast might kill all of us. I'm staying with him while you evacuate the others. The suggestion created immediate opposition from the entire team. Negative, Mitchell responded firmly. We don't leave anyone behind, ever. That includes you. Then, Jackson dies, and maybe we all die trying to carry him through terrain we can't navigate that quickly. I stay with him, stabilize his condition, and wait for the next extraction opportunity. Hayes spoke up from his position supporting Thompson. Ma'am, with respect, you don't understand military protocol. No one stays behind. This isn't military protocol, it's medical reality. Jackson won't survive being carried at the speed we need to reach that helicopter. But he might survive if I can treat him properly while we wait for another evacuation. Sarah's proposal represented everything she had learned about triage and resource allocation during 12 years of emergency medicine. Sometimes saving everyone meant making impossible choices about who to save first. In a hospital, she could treat multiple critical patients simultaneously. In a combat zone with limited resources, priorities had to be established. Commander Mitchell studied Jackson's condition, the terrain ahead, and the timing requirements for evacuation. His military training emphasized never leaving personnel behind, but his leadership experience recognized when circumstances demanded difficult decisions. How long can you keep him alive if we leave additional medical supplies? Unknown. Maybe days, maybe hours. Depends on whether I can control the bleeding and infection. But his chances are better with me providing continuous care than trying to carry him through mountains at double time. Kim ended the debate from his position leaning against Rodriguez. She's right. I can make it to the LZ. Thompson can make it. Jackson can't. And killing ourselves trying won't help him. The practical assessment from a wounded SEAL carried weight that Sarah's medical opinion alone might not have achieved. These men understood risk assessment and resource allocation in ways that complemented her medical training. Mitchell made the command decision. Torres, Rodriguez, and Hayes evacuate Thompson and Kim to the landing zone. Park and I stay with Jackson and Ms. Martinez. We'll establish a defensive position and wait for the next extraction window. Sarah felt relief mixed with terror. She would have continuous support while treating Jackson, but they would also be isolated in hostile territory with wounded personnel and limited supplies. The next evacuation opportunity might not come for days. The team split with efficient coordination that spoke to their professional training. Essential medical supplies were redistributed, with Sarah keeping everything necessary for treating Jackson's critical condition. Ammunition and defensive equipment were positioned to protect their improvised medical facility. Take care of them, Sarah told Torres as the evacuation team prepared to leave. Thompson's skull pressure could increase again, and Kim's leg injury needs surgical attention as soon as possible. Take care of yourself, Torres replied. We'll be back for you. Sarah watched Thompson and Kim disappear into the darkness, supported by teammates who would ensure their survival. Now her focus could concentrate entirely on Jackson's critical condition without the competing demands of evacuation timing. The defensive position Mitchell and Park established provided security, while Sarah worked to stabilize Jackson's deteriorating condition. Fresh bleeding had resumed from his abdominal wound, requiring immediate surgical intervention under primitive conditions. "I need to operate again," she announced. "The infection and movement have caused new bleeding that field dressings can't control." Working by portable lighting with Park providing assistance, Sarah reopened Jackson's wound for the second time in 24 hours. The internal damage was worse than her initial assessment had indicated. Shrapnel from the original injury had created multiple tears in internal organs that were bleeding slowly but steadily. "Can you fix it?" Mitchell asked, maintaining security watch while providing updates on Sarah's progress. "I can try, but this is major surgery using field equipment. Even in a hospital, this would be a challenging case." The procedure required 2 hours of meticulous work, closing tears in Jackson's intestines and liver while controlling bleeding from damaged blood vessels. Sarah used techniques she had learned by observing surgeons, but had never performed independently. Every decision carried life or death consequences. When she finally completed the surgery, Jackson's vital signs had stabilized for the first time since the evacuation began. His pulse was stronger, his blood pressure improved, and his breathing became less labored. The antibiotics were finally gaining control over the infection that had been killing him slowly. "How does he look?" Park asked, noting the improvement in Jackson's appearance. "Like he might actually survive this." The surgery was successful, but he needs several days of recovery before he can be moved safely. Dawn brought radio contact with the forward operating base and updates on Thompson and Kim's successful evacuation. Both men had reached hospital facilities and were receiving definitive medical care. Sarah felt profound satisfaction knowing her medical assessments had been correct and her treatment had saved their lives. Rescue 2, this is base. Thompson and Kim are stable and receiving treatment. Outstanding work by all personnel. What is Jackson's current status? Sarah took the radio to provide a direct medical report. Base, this is Martinez. Jackson underwent successful surgery during the night. Vital signs are stable. Infection appears controlled. He needs minimum 72 hours recovery before transport. Understood. Be advised enemy forces are actively searching the area. Maintain defensive posture and limit radio communication. The next 3 days tested Sarah's endurance in ways nursing school had never prepared her for. Providing continuous medical care while maintaining security alertness and surviving on minimal food and water pushed her physical and mental limits. Jackson's recovery progressed better than expected. The surgery had successfully controlled his bleeding, and the antibiotics were winning the battle against infection. By the 3rd day, he was conscious and talking, asking questions about his teammates, and expressing gratitude for Sarah's medical care. "You saved my life," he said during one of his alert periods. "I remember being in that cave, feeling like I was dying. Then, you showed up, and everything changed." That's what nurses do. We show up when people need help. Not like this. You left your whole life behind to help people you'd never met. That's something special. Sarah realized that Jackson was right. She had abandoned everything familiar to provide medical care to wounded warriors in a combat zone. The decision had seemed natural at the time, but the magnitude of her commitment was becoming clear. The extraction helicopter arrived on the 4th day, bringing additional medical personnel and equipment for Jackson's transport. Dr. Crane herself had accompanied the evacuation team to ensure Jackson received proper care during transport to definitive medical facilities. "Excellent work," Dr. Crane said after examining Jackson and reviewing Sarah's treatment notes. "You performed surgery that saved his life under conditions that would challenge most surgeons. I'm recommending you for military medical commendation." The flight back to the forward operating base gave Sarah time to process everything that had happened. In less than a week, she had traveled from unemployment and uncertainty to performing life-saving surgery in a combat zone. The transformation felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than her actual experience. Commander Mitchell found her in the medical facility after Jackson had been transferred to a military hospital. Ms. Martinez, I want to discuss your future with Naval Special Warfare. What you accomplished out there demonstrates capabilities we need on a permanent basis. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a career. Military nursing with Special Operations Forces. The training is extensive, the assignments are challenging, and the work is unlike anything civilian medicine can provide. Sarah considered the offer while looking out the window at mountains that had nearly killed her but had also revealed capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. The nurse who had been fired for refusing to compromise patient care had become someone who performed emergency surgery in caves while enemy forces searched for her location. What would that involve exactly? Training at military medical facilities, deployment with special operations teams, providing medical support for missions that require the highest level of expertise and dedication. The opportunity represented everything Sarah had ever wanted in nursing: challenging cases, meaningful work, and the respect of colleagues who valued competence above politics. It also meant leaving civilian life permanently and accepting risks that most nurses never faced. I need time to think about this. Of course. But, Sarah, what you did out there proves you belong with us. You have gifts that shouldn't be wasted in civilian hospitals dealing with administrators who don't understand what medicine really means. That evening, Sarah called Elena from the secure communication facility. The conversation was limited by security requirements, but she was able to convey that she was safe and that the mission had been successful. You sound different, Elena observed. Stronger somehow. I feel different. Like I finally found out who I'm supposed to be. And who is that? Sarah looked around the military facility, thought about the lives she had saved and the colleagues who valued her skills without reservation. I think I'm supposed to be exactly where I am. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the graduation ceremony at Naval Medical Center Portsmouth, receiving her commission as a lieutenant in the United States Navy Nurse Corps. The transformation from fired civilian nurse to military officer felt both natural and miraculous. Admiral Rebecca Patterson pinned the gold nursing insignia on Sarah's uniform while her family watched from the audience. Elena had driven down from the coastal town, bringing their parents who still struggled to understand how their daughter had gone from unemployment to military service in less than a year. Dr. Patricia Holbrook sat in the front row, her pride obvious as she watched the ceremony that had begun with her recommendation to Naval Special Warfare. Lieutenant Martinez, Admiral Patterson said formally, you have demonstrated exceptional courage and skill in service to wounded warriors. The Navy is honored to welcome you to our ranks. The words carried weight that civilian recognition had never possessed. These were people who understood the difference between adequate performance and life-saving excellence under impossible conditions. Sarah had found her tribe among warriors and medical professionals who valued competence above politics. After the ceremony, Sarah was approached by the 3 men whose lives she had saved in that mountain cave. Thompson, Kim, and Jackson had all made full recoveries and returned to active duty. They had requested permission to attend her commissioning ceremony. Ma'am, Chief Thompson said, offering a crisp salute. We wanted to thank you again for what you did. All 3 of us are alive because you were willing to risk everything to help us. You don't need to thank me. I was just doing my job. No, ma'am, Jackson corrected. Your job was being a civilian nurse in a hospital. What you did was way beyond any job description. You saved our lives because you're the kind of person who shows up when people need help, no matter the cost. The reunion was emotional for Sarah, seeing these men healthy and whole when she remembered them bleeding and unconscious in a cave. Their recovery validated every difficult decision she had made during that mission. The risks had been worth taking because the outcome had been 3 lives saved. Dr. Crane joined the conversation, wearing her Navy uniform with the rank insignia of a captain. Sarah, I have new orders for you. You're being assigned to the Special Operations Medical Training Program. 6 months of advanced combat medicine, followed by deployment with SEAL teams requiring dedicated medical support. The assignment was exactly what Sarah had hoped for when she accepted Mitchell's offer to join the Navy. She would be working with the most elite warriors in the military, providing medical care under the most challenging conditions possible. It represented the pinnacle of military nursing. There's more, Dr. Crane continued. The program wants you to help develop training curricula for civilian nurses transitioning to military special operations medicine. Your experience bridges both worlds in ways that could benefit future personnel. Teaching other nurses how to make the transition from civilian to military medicine appealed to Sarah's desire to share knowledge and improve patient care. She remembered how unprepared she had felt during those first days of military medical training. Future nurses wouldn't have to navigate that transition alone. Commander Mitchell appeared as the conversation concluded, still wearing the same calm confidence that had characterized their first meeting at the Harborview Diner. "Lieutenant Martinez, ready for your next assignment?" "More ready than I was 6 months ago, sir." "Good, because we have another mission that requires your specific expertise." Sarah felt the familiar rush of anticipation that came with new medical challenges. The work would be dangerous, demanding, and unlike anything civilian nursing could offer. It would also be meaningful in ways that hospital politics had never provided. Elena found Sarah during the reception following the ceremony. "I'm proud of you, but I'm also terrified. You're going back into combat zones to save more wounded soldiers." "That's exactly what I'm going to do. And for the first time in my life, I'm completely certain that's what I'm supposed to be doing." What happened to the sister who just wanted a quiet nursing job where she could help people without corporate politics interfering? Sarah considered the question while watching her new military colleagues interact with easy camaraderie. She found out that helping people sometimes requires going places where corporate policies don't exist. These warriors depend on medical care that only comes from people willing to share their risks. Dr. Holbrook joined the sisters, her expression mixing pride with concern. "Sarah, I need to tell you something about why I recommended you for this program. I served with Naval Special Warfare early in my career. I know what you're signing up for, and I know why it matters. You never told me about your military service. It's not something I discussed at Metropolitan General. But when Commander Mitchell contacted Military Medical Networks looking for a nurse with your specific qualifications, several people referred him to me. I told him about your skills, your character, and your recent termination." The revelation explained how Sarah's name had reached people she had never heard of when she needed an opportunity most. Dr. Holbrook's military connections had created a bridge between Sarah's civilian nursing experience and the military career she was beginning. "I also told him," Dr. Holbrook continued, "that firing you was the biggest mistake Metropolitan General ever made. You're exactly the kind of nurse military medicine needs." The validation meant everything to Sarah. Dr. Holbrook had risked her reputation to recommend someone recently fired from a civilian position. The faith she had shown in Sarah's character and abilities had created opportunities that were changing everything. Later that evening, Sarah walked along the Norfolk waterfront, watching Navy ships preparing for deployment. The scene reminded her of Elena's coastal town, but the purpose here was different. These ships carried warriors who might need her medical skills in places where traditional medical care wasn't available. Her phone rang with a call from Marcus Thompson, the 17-year-old car accident victim whose case had cost Sarah her civilian job. His recovery had been complete, and he had graduated from high school with plans to attend college in the fall. "Ms. Martinez, I saw the news story about you joining the Navy. I wanted to call and tell you congratulations." "Marcus, how did you get my number?" "Dr. Holbrook gave it to me. She said you'd want to know how I'm doing." The conversation with Marcus reminded Sarah why she had become a nurse in the first place. Patient care had always been about more than medical procedures. It was about being present during people's most vulnerable moments, providing expertise and compassion when both were desperately needed. "I'm proud of what you're doing," Marcus continued. "Dr. Holbrook told me that you lost your job because you wouldn't compromise on my medical care. Now you're saving soldiers' lives. That's pretty amazing." After the call ended, Sarah reflected on the strange connections that had brought her to this point. Refusing to falsify records for Marcus had cost her civilian job, but had also demonstrated the character traits that made her valuable to military medicine. Sometimes career disasters were actually course corrections. The next morning brought orders for her first assignment with the Special Operations Medical Training Program. She would begin advanced combat medicine training in 2 weeks, followed by deployment with a SEAL team conducting classified operations in hostile territory. Reading the orders, Sarah felt the same mixture of excitement and terror that had characterized her decision to accept Mitchell's original offer. She was about to enter a world where medical mistakes could result in mission failure and warrior deaths. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity to make a difference. Dr. Crane found Sarah in the officers' quarters, reviewing medical textbooks that would prepare her for advanced training. Second thoughts. Constant second thoughts, just like before my first mission. But that doesn't change the fact that this is what I want to do with my life. Good answer. The day you stop having second thoughts about the risks is the day you start making dangerous mistakes. Sarah appreciated the perspective from someone whose experience spanned decades of military medicine. Dr. Crane had probably saved hundreds of lives under conditions that challenged every aspect of medical training. Her guidance would be invaluable during the transition ahead. Can I ask you something? Sarah said. Do you ever regret choosing military medicine over civilian practice? Never. Civilian medicine has its place, but it can't provide the clarity of purpose you find here. Every patient you treat is someone willing to die for principles larger than themselves. That changes how you think about medical care. The observation resonated with Sarah's growing understanding of military medicine's unique challenges and rewards. These weren't customers paying for healthcare services. They were warriors who had volunteered to face death in defense of others. Medical care became a sacred trust rather than a business transaction. 2 weeks later, Sarah reported to the Special Operations Medical Training Facility at Camp Pendleton. The curriculum would prepare her for providing medical care during combat operations, treating injuries that civilian nurses never encountered, and making life or death decisions without hospital resources or specialist consultations. Her training class included 12 nurses transitioning from civilian practice to military special operations medicine. Each had demonstrated exceptional skills in trauma care, and each had answered the call to serve warriors whose missions demanded the highest level of medical expertise. The training was physically and mentally demanding, combining advanced medical procedures with combat skills necessary for survival in hostile environments. Sarah learned to provide medical care while under fire, treat battlefield injuries that had no civilian equivalent, and maintain sterile conditions in environments that challenged every principle of hospital infection control. 3 months into training, Sarah received word that Thompson, Kim, and Jackson were being deployed again. All three had requested that she be assigned as their team's medical support if she completed training successfully. The request honored Sarah beyond anything she had experienced in civilian nursing. They trust you, the training commander explained. In special operations, trust isn't given lightly. They know you'll do whatever it takes to bring them home alive. The weight of that trust motivated Sarah through the remaining training challenges. Physical conditioning that pushed her body to its limits. Medical simulations that tested her ability to think clearly under extreme stress. Combat training that prepared her for the realities of providing medical care in war zones. On graduation day, Sarah stood with 11 other nurses who had completed the most challenging medical training the military offered. They were now qualified to provide medical support for the most dangerous missions undertaken by American forces. Admiral Patterson returned to present their Special Operations medical insignia, a symbol worn by fewer than 100 nurses in the entire military. You have volunteered for the most demanding assignment in military nursing, she told the graduates. Warriors will depend on your skills in places where medical mistakes cannot be corrected, and failure is not an option. Sarah received orders assigning her to SEAL Team 6 for a classified mission scheduled to begin in 30 days. The assignment represented everything she had worked toward since accepting Commander Mitchell's original offer. She would finally be serving alongside the warriors whose lives she had saved in that mountain cave. The night before deployment, Sarah called Elena from the secure communication facility. The conversation was limited by security restrictions, but she could convey her excitement about the mission ahead. Are you happy? Elena asked. Happier than I've ever been. This work matters in ways I couldn't have imagined when I was fired from Metropolitan General. Just promise me you'll be careful. I know these missions are dangerous. They are dangerous, but I'm not doing this alone. I'm part of a team that understands the risks and trains constantly to manage them. These warriors will protect me while I take care of them. After the call, Sarah packed her medical equipment for deployment, each item chosen specifically for the mission profile and environmental challenges they would face. The gear was more sophisticated than anything she had used during her first mission, but the principles remained the same. Be prepared for any medical emergency, and never compromise on patient care. Standing at the window of her quarters, looking out at the base where warriors prepared for missions that would test every aspect of their training, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she had been fired for refusing to compromise medical ethics. Now she was preparing to provide medical support for operations that could influence national security. The transformation proved that career disasters could become opportunities for people willing to trust their values and take calculated risks. Sarah had lost one career but had found another that aligned perfectly with her desire to provide meaningful medical care to people who needed it most. Tomorrow she would board an aircraft bound for a classified destination, carrying medical equipment and expertise that could save warriors' lives in conditions where traditional medical care wasn't available. The work would be challenging, dangerous, and unlike anything civilian nursing could offer. It was exactly what she wanted to do with her life. Sarah Martinez, the fired nurse who had walked away from everything familiar, was ready to answer the call when warriors needed her most. The helicopters would descend, voices would yell asking where she was, and she would be there, prepared to provide the medical care that could make the difference between life and death. The fired nurse had found her calling among warriors who understood the value of people willing to risk everything for others. She was exactly where she belonged,